Welcome to this quick example of how to create a character in Call of Cthulhu on Roll20. And we want to do this because it's going to streamline some of the gameplay. You can see here I have a character I've already made, Magnus Ernst. Magnus is actually a doctor, and he has various skills that are relevant to being a doctor. For example, he has first aid here. He also has medicine. Let's say we're looking at the chat here, and someone gets injured, and we need Magnus to make a skill roll for medicine. Well, if we've set everything up properly, it's actually possible for Magnus to do the roll, or Magnus's player to do the roll, right from the skill sheet. You can see here that was the worst possible roll he could have made. Unfortunately, that probably means the patient not only died, but there might have been some collateral damage nearby that was equally bad, or maybe Magnus might have injured himself in some serious way. That was not a great example. You'd really love for an example of how to do skill rolls to work out a little better. Let's pretend that first one didn't happen, and maybe Magnus was just doing some first aid on someone who was a little bit injured. Okay, that was a hard success. That person is probably going to be okay. But this is why setting up the character sheet works out so well, not only for the roles, but also as a way of doing quick reference for things like movement rates, the ability to dodge. If you need your backstory for some motivation, you need to tell us all you have certain possessions on you that'll be useful in part of the scenario, and so on. It's really quite handy, and it really fleshes out the character, and I hope increases your motivation to play. So here's a quick tip before we get to character creation. But if you double tap on that character sheet, what you can do is you can basically collapse the character sheet name and put it somewhere, wherever you want on the game canvas. And then when you need to look at it again, it's very easy to just open right back up and look at your skills and do a skill roll if it's needed. And that's reflected over here in the chat bar on the right. So this is what we're going to do, actually. Magnus has served us really well, but I think what we're going to have to do is send him away. We're going to pretend that he doesn't exist. Yes, I am deleting him. Goodbye, Magnus. And now we are going to remake him. So how do we do that? Well, we go to the journal at a start, and we say add, and I want to add a character. And there are a few things you can do if you already have the token out, which I don't yet, but hey, why not? Why don't I move Max's token over to the board? Since I already made a picture for him, I might as well send that right up there and select it. And I'll say I want to use that particular character token, and I can also drag the same picture from my art library. I use token stamp to make the character tokens after finding a picture that I think represents the character. So you can do a similar kind of thing or ask for help to do that. I like the name I had before, so let's just stick with that. For now, I'm going to keep him in my journal, and he can be controlled by me. I'm going to remind myself, well, he's a player character and or player. I'm going to save that change, and you'll see here, when you go to look at the character sheet, well, there's really not anything there yet. We're going to use something called the Charactermancer to help us go through basically a wizard that creates the character details. It doesn't do all the work for us, but it does a heck of a lot of the work for us and saves a bunch of time. And the game is about playing the game. It's not about spending a lot of time on characters, because you're going to spend a lot of time living in the character. But let's see if we can move along to creating a character relatively quickly. I like the quick fire method. You're free to experiment with the standard and point buy methods, but I like this quick fire method, which basically says you have one slot you can use with 80 points, one with 70, two with 60, three with 50, and one with 40. And what you have to do next is you just go through and you allocate what you think is reasonable. So I'm going to make Magnus a doctor. But I know that the power, which is kind of like willpower, statistic is connected to sanity, and I'm going to make him a man of science. So I'll say there are things that are really relevant to a man of science. His intelligence is really important. The education he had is pretty important. He's a doctor, so he needs a strong level of dexterity. He probably is going to run into things that are going to test his constitution. Maybe it's important that he has a good appearance. 50 is actually about average, but I think that'll be okay. And then his size is about average, but he's not very strong. And as you create your character, you'll see if any of this makes sense to you, and you'll make changes depending on what you think you'd like your character to be. But then you do this thing called roll luck. Luck is useful in lots of different ways. It's most useful for buying yourself out of trouble, which you'll find later when you fail rolls, which people inevitably do. So that's this part of the characteristics, and then we click next, and we're going to go through and do the rest. Now you can decide things like how old is he going to be, right? Or you can roll. 68 is a bit older than I wanted. I don't want to take the movement penalty for somebody who's a bit older. I think Magnus is going to have to do a bit of running around, so I'm going to make him 40 years old instead. And once you reach a certain age, you get to do an improvement roll to see if you had better education. So I am going to do an improvement roll. I happen to make that. That was fantastic. So good for me. And then you get to do that one more time as well. Oh, didn't make that one. But, still we moved up a little bit in terms of education. But because of his age and the education improvement, we have to make some deductions in a couple of different areas in order to make up for the advancements we had there in education. So we'll have to do things like, and the tool even tells you, right, deduct 5 points among strength, constitution, or dexterity. In this case, I already know he's not that strong, so I'm going to drop constitution, say, by maybe it'll be constitution that takes the full hit, actually, because he's a doctor. I think he needs his dexterity, and that's useful in lots of other ways. And so we'll leave the rest of this as it is, and we don't have to explain it that much right now. We just click next again. And I have already decided that I'm going to use one of the standard character types, the Doctor of Medicine, and that comes with a set of skills that are part of the profession already. First aid, Latin, medicine, psychology, biology, and pharmacy. And so there is a way that the Charactermancer automatically calculates how many skill points you get to allocate to your different skills. You'll see that coming up soon. But I'm going to add just a couple other kinds of skills to the set of default skills that Magnus gets, because since this is a game of cosmic horror, and I know that the characters in peril have all these challenges with sanity, I'm actually going to give him some psychoanalysis capability. And I also know that it's very important for, and you'll see here that what the tool does is it starts to kind of highlight the skills you've already picked, so you can't select them again. I think spot hidden is also a really critical skill for the game, and I think a useful skill for a doctor to have. So let's give him that. And now you get to allocate your remaining skill points. You'll see you get some for your occupation and some that you add for personal skills that can be related to your occupation or not. So there is some information about credit rating in the guide. Just keep in mind that the higher this number is, the richer you are, but the less points you have for other things that might be useful in the game. I'm going to start looking at the occupation skills that I have left and just make some fine-tuning for Magnus. And my goal is, if you look on the right side, to just think about the odds of having to exercise a skill in a certain scenario. So you're usually rolling a D100 and you're trying to get under your skill level. So since his first aid skill is now 60, it means when I roll that die, that D100, I have a 60% chance of being successful with my first aid skill. Right, so that's the way to think about it. And you just start to allocate your occupation points among the different kinds of skills that you see here. I actually am going to, I think, bring medicine all the way up to 75 because I really want Magnus as a doctor to be successful when I need to call on him. And for some reason, there is a little weird bug here that shows psychoanalysis twice, but I'm just going to put something into this skill once. Maybe I'll add 39 points here. You can tell I like even numbers, right? Psychology is really mostly about telling whether people are telling you the truth or not, but that is important for a doctor. And I'm going to keep just scrolling down. The regular skill for spot hidden is only 25. I think it's useful to bump that up a little bit. And then let's see, are there any other occupation skills? I have 73 points left. I think he probably needs something better than very basic Latin. That's useful sometimes for reading special tomes. He should know more about biology. Part of this is what would be useful in the game, but part of it is, what's realistic for the character to have in terms of skills, say. So now I'm going to go, I'm not going to add any additional skills. I'm going to worry about my allocation of my remaining 21 points and think about, well, if I was in a jam and I needed Magnus to be able to help out with that, what would be the best way to do that? So, you know what? I think maybe slightly better skill in first aid would be good. I'm trying to obey this optional rule that they have for brand new characters where you try not to have their skills go over 75 when they're first generated. But let's say, it would be useful for Magnus to really be able to talk somebody down if they start to go crazy. So maybe we'll say this is, 50 points, and then he's got 5 left, so let's bump up the spot hidden a little bit. And so those are skills related to the occupation, and then we have 140 skills left for, or sorry, 140 skill points left for the skills that are not related to his occupation. So I think Magnus is going to know something about how to damage people since he's so familiar with anatomy. So he's probably going to have a pretty good knowledge of how to use a handgun. And then let's go back up and say, what else would be useful? Well, maybe he's a fan of boxing. Maybe he boxed when he was in school, and so he knows a little bit about brawling by hand or with his hands. And, I'll tell you, brawling as a skill does come up in Call of Cthulhu once in a while. Let's say that he is, I don't know, maybe he's a smaller person, so perhaps he has a lighter step. Let's give him a little bit more support for stealth. Let's perhaps take some of our points and really increase his odds of being helpful when it comes to psychoanalysis, again, in case he's got to help someone who might be going a little crazy or a lot crazy. Clearly, if he's a medical man, he's been able to use the library, so let's give him a little bit of that. And it's also a bit handy to have better than normal climbing skill. Let's sort of rationalize that, saying, he's very dexterous with his hands and he's got a lot of good balance, and that makes him a good physician, but also will be handy later. And you really can't go wrong with adding some dodge skill, because that winds up being useful in all kinds of scenarios. And then let's see, anything else? There is an advantage to being a better than basic jumper. There might be some jumping involved in the game. Let's say that he's really observant as well. He needs that for his diagnoses, and he's a good listener, right? And so I know this is not exactly the same as listening for someone taking steps toward you in the dark, but it's close enough, right? And now we'll go to next, and we're given this nice form that we should fill out with additional details to just sort of flesh out the character. So let's say that he, so many of the adventures take place in Boston. Let's say that he was born in Switzerland. I guess he's not really young. A competent, serious doctor, firm and commanding demeanor. All right, and you can always refine this a little bit later. It's not a problem. So ideology and beliefs. Some people, when they're generating character, they just want to roll and see where the dice take them. But I prefer to just pick from the list and say, oh, well, science has all the answers, right? Medicine has taught him everything he needs to know about how to cope with the world. No foreshadowing there at all. Meaningful locations. How about place for socializing? There's no place like the Dapper Cat on Friday and Saturday nights. He likes to unwind. He's a serious guy, but he likes to unwind. Let's say he had some sort of significant person. How about a sibling, perhaps? He has a feeling of regret because when he went to medical school, his brother decided to go off on his own on a great adventure out west in caps and hasn't been heard from for many years. Or whatever. Treasured possessions. How about let's see, an essential item from his occupation? Let's say his bag he was given by his college when he graduated. Okay, and traits. You know what? I'm going to say even though he's serious, he's also a ladies' man. And I'll call him the Love Doctor. Oops. I'll probably change that later. It's fine for now. And then let's review. Okay, we've got all this information about him. Right, various adjustments that have been made. We've used all our points. We're not wasting anything. He makes kind of an average amount of money for what he does, and he has all these different skills, and he has a backstory that's fleshed him out a little bit. And let's say we're finished. And now we have a character. Right, so we have all these important details about him, and it's easy to do the rolls. Let's finish up by just going over to add some possessions. So you'll have to make changes to your form as you play the game. I'm going to make a couple of changes right now. I'm going to add a walking stick with a silver palm roll. No reason. I'm going to add a doctor's bag. All right, let's assume that that has typical doctor stuff in it. And I'm going to add a handgun, but a small one. How about a Colt .25? This is not carrying around a big cannon or anything like that. Right, and then I will take it out of edit mode, and we'll see if we say, let's say he's got to break down a door or something like that, and he's got to make a strength roll. Will he be able to do that? Oh, there we go. Failure. That's a shame. How about something else? Like, let's see how it goes when he has to run or help somebody with first aid. Yep. That was not bad. And, we're just testing it out right now. Critical success for the medical skill. That's great. And of course, that doesn't always happen, but we like it when it does, when he's our character. So again, remember, you can double click on this to move it out of the way so you can get access to your character sheet very easily whenever you want to. And I'm just going to do a couple other things to finish everything off. And this I can help any player with, but you might also be able to do it yourself. So one thing is, you saw me move the token on the board earlier. We have to make sure that the token is associated with the character. I like to show the nameplate so that appears under the character name. And then there are some little meters that appear on top of the character. I usually like to have the hit points appear on top in green, and then sanity points are pretty important in Call of Cthulhu, and finally luck points. Hopefully you don't see your luck running out too much. And there we go. We're back to having Magnus available for the next adventure. And now you know how to create a character in Call of Cthulhu using the Roll20 methods. All right. See you in the game.